Harry Truman, the architect of the atomic age, read and published by Mr. Books. History often memorializes its icons in sharply defined strokes, hero or villain, champion or cautionary tale. Yet reality rarely accommodates such simplicity, and nowhere is this duality more powerfully embodied than in the figure of Harry S. Truman, the 33rd President of the United States. To many, Truman is the man who made the agonizing decision to unleash atomic power, forever altering the fabric of war and peace. But who was Harry Truman truly? Behind the somber photographs and the resolute gazes lies a man shaped by humble beginnings, extraordinary circumstances, and the weight of unimaginable decisions. This book, Harry Truman, the architect of the atomic age, seeks to humanize a figure often overshadowed by the epoch-defining choices he made. Far more than merely the leader who ended World War II with a technological cataclysm, Truman was a product of rural Missouri, a man fueled by principle, loyalty, and a deep sense of personal responsibility. He was a president who stumbled into his role amid global upheaval, thrust into the maelstrom of war and politics by fate rather than ambition. We explore Truman's journey from his modest upbringing to his rapid ascent through political ranks, a climb grounded in dogged determination and guided by a moral compass shaped by both hardship and hope. The central chapters immerse the reader in the sleepless nights and moral quandaries surrounding the decision to drop atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, illuminating the depth of Truman's reflections on the potential consequences for humanity. Yet, Truman's story does not end with the mushroom clouds that shrouded Japan, the Cold War's icy dawn, the Marshall Plan, the creation of NATO, the Korean War, and the Truman Doctrine all emerged in the shadow of the atomic age, and all bore the imprint of Truman's character and convictions. A portrait emerges of a leader often doubted and derided in his own time, but whose actions, however controversial, shaped the contours of the modern world. In these pages, we seek not merely to judge, but to understand the personal struggles, ethical dilemmas, and quiet resolve of Harry Truman. Through empathy and careful reflection, this book presents the man behind the moment, striving to recapture the complexity of leadership at civilization's most perilous crossroads. Before we dive in, make sure to subscribe and hit that like button to support the channel. And don't forget to turn on the notification bell so you never miss an audiobook that could change your life. Now let's begin. Enjoy. Chapter 1. Roots of a Leader, Truman's Early Years. Harry S. Truman's life began far from the corridors of power under the clear, open skies of Missouri in 1884. The rolling hills and rich earth of Lamar shaped the rhythm of his earliest days. His parents, John Anderson Truman and Martha Ellen Young Truman, were not men and women of means, but principles and dignity bound them, and they nurtured these same qualities in their son. The world Truman was born into was one in a state of transition. The scars of the Civil War still lingered in Missouri, a border state torn by conflicting loyalties. The tremors of change were both social and technological. Railroads expanded, towns burgeoned, and new ideas challenged old conventions. Truman's family moved several times during his youth, first to a farm near Harrisonville, then to the bustling town of Independence, Missouri. The countryside's quiet rigor left an indelible mark on young Harry, instilling a deep sense of responsibility and a profound respect for hard work. Truman's earliest education took place in one room, schoolhouses, where children of all ages shared benches and blackboards. He was an eager learner, voraciously devouring every book he could find. The Bible and Plutarch's Lives sat side by side on his small desk at home. Young Harry often wore thick glasses, a necessity for his poor eyesight, that rendered sports a challenge but reading a joy. His days were punctuated by chores on the family farm, moments at the piano with his mother, and hours lost in literature. He was, by his own later admission, a sissy in the eyes of some contemporaries. Yet it was precisely this scholarly inclination that would become a source of unexpected strength. The family's move to independence exposed Harry to the broader world. Here, his mother's genteel expectations met the rough-and-tumble ethos of a prairie town. He formed close friendships, particularly with his future wife, Bess Wallace, whose intelligence and independence left a lasting impression. Early on, Truman demonstrated a deep loyalty to friends and family, a trait that would define both his political and personal relationships in the years to come. Economic hardship was a constant companion for the Trumans. Farming brought little financial reward, and fluctuations in the market often translated to hardship at home. Truman learned the value of perseverance, experiencing firsthand the distress caused by failed crops and the relentless cycle of hope and disappointment. Yet through it all, his family remained close-knit, supporting one another through adversity and success alike. Religion permeated the Truman household, not as dogma, but as a framework for understanding the world. His mother's Methodism was gentle and practical, reinforcing the imperative of honesty, the importance of community, and a sense of obligation to those less fortunate. This moral grounding would become a pillar of Truman's inner life, guiding his actions even as he entered the unpredictable terrain of national governance. Harry's journey to adulthood was not without setbacks. He aspired to attend West Point, but his poor eyesight dashed that dream. Undeterred, he worked a series of jobs, from railroad timekeeper to bank clerk, learning the realities of labor and the value of every dollar earned. Eventually, the family returned to farming, and Harry assumed greater responsibility for managing the daily operations. The unpredictability of farm life mirrored the uncertainties that would later attend his presidency. Nature's whims, market fluctuations, and the ever-present threat of failure. The seeds of Truman's leadership were sown in these formative years, not in moments of triumph, but in the quiet discipline of daily toil, the steadfast love of family, and the challenge of adversity. These experiences shaped a man of extraordinary resilience and humility, one who would later say, "The buck stops here," and mean it. As adolescence gave way to adulthood, Harry Truman carried with him the lessons of Missouri, that integrity is forged in difficulty, that loyalty is a binding force, and that every life, however humble, has the potential to alter the course of history. This unassuming farm boy, shaped by hardship but unbowed by it, would one day sit at history's epicenter, a reluctant architect at the dawn of the atomic age. Chapter 2. Rising Through the Ranks, from Missouri to the Senate. The transformation of Harry Truman from Missouri farm boy to national political figure was not the result of grand ambition or destiny's clear call, but of steadfast love for community and country, coupled with unwavering perseverance. Returning from working as a bank clerk and apprentice, Harry attempted, alongside his father, to conquer the unpredictable world of farming. It was a partnership marked by both hope and struggle. Through each failed crop and stubborn season, Truman's diligence never faltered. He developed a pragmatic approach to hardship, learning that the only way forward was through honest effort and resilience. The call to service came in 1917, when the United States entered World War I. At 33, older than most recruits, Truman saw the war as an urgent duty, a cause larger than himself. Joining the Missouri National Guard, He was soon elected as the first lieutenant of Battery F, owing to his organizational skill and innate sense of fairness. The experience of leading men in battle would leave a deep, permanent imprint. The muddy trenches of France, the agony of loss, and the necessity of difficult decisions all left their mark on the man who had always sought to avoid unnecessary confrontation. As a captain, Truman developed a leadership style built on mutual respect and integrity, expecting and earning loyalty from those in his charge. Following the war, Truman returned to Missouri with a newfound confidence. Emboldened by his military service and eager to provide for his family, he entered into a business venture with his friend Eddie Jacobson, opening a haberdashery in downtown Kansas City. The economy, however, was against them. The business succumbed to the post-war recession. Though the store's failure left Truman saddled with debt well into his political career, he faced his creditors with characteristic honesty, vowing to repay every cent. Parallel to Truman's battles was his slow, steady introduction to the world of politics. His immersion into the volatile, machine-driven society of Kansas City politics was unplanned. He was brought into local Democratic circles by Tom Pendergast, a powerful and controversial party boss. After Truman's loyal, efficient management of men and resources in wartime had impressed the right people, Truman's initial political role was humble. He was appointed an Eastern Judge of Jackson County, a non-judicial administrative position. The title, Judge, was misleading, yet Truman embraced the responsibility with the seriousness learned from years of farm management. This role, he oversaw roads, public works, and fiscal organization. His reputation grew not through charisma, but through results, infrastructure improvements, budget management, and a meticulous attention to ethical governance. While association with Pendergast generated suspicion among critics, Truman maintained his integrity even in the face of pressure to bend the rules. His honesty and relentless work ethic propelled him toward opportunities that appeared as natural progressions, though they were hard-won. Truman's constituents knew him as a man of the people, approachable and outrightly human, never above greeting an acquaintance or lending a compassionate ear to local troubles. In 1934, when the National Democratic Party sought a Senate candidate, from Missouri, Truman, at the urging of Pendergast and driven by a sense of duty, entered the race. His campaign was modest, supported primarily by his reputation and the Pendergast machine. Against all odds and expectations, he won. In the Senate, discretion and discipline remained his signature attributes. Never a headline grabber, he toiled. On committees, most notably chairing the Senate Special Committee to investigate the National Defense Program, later known as the Truman Committee, which fought waste and corruption during World War II's mobilization. His dogged pursuit of efficiency and accountability saved billions of dollars and perhaps even lives, making him a figure of national respect. Through trial, error, and self-effacing determination, Harry Truman's political star had ascended. Yet as 1944 approached, a new and even more unimaginable chapter beckoned. A place on Franklin D. Roosevelt's ticket as vice president, a role that would alter the trajectory not only of Truman's life, but of the entire world. With humility and an ever-present sense of duty, Truman was about to be thrust into history's epicenter, forever remembered as the man who would guide the world into and through the atomic age. Chapter 3. The Unforeseen. President, stepping into Roosevelt's shoes. April 12, 1945, brought a sudden rupture in the fabric of American leadership. Franklin D. Roosevelt, the towering figure who had steered the nation through depression and total war was gone, and the nation's eyes turned in anxious expectation to his untested vice president, Harry S. Truman. For Truman, the transition was abrupt and jarring. Having served less than 3 months as vice president, barely acquainted with the intricate web of wartime diplomacy, science, and secret weapons development, he was thrust into the Oval Office with little warning. The gravity of the role and the scale of the crisis left him stunned. "I felt like the moon, the stars, and all the planets had fallen on me," he later confided to reporters. The sense of being unprepared was almost overwhelming. Roosevelt, shrouded in secrecy, had shared little of the critical details with Truman. In the first hours and days following his swearing-in, Truman confronted a barrage of urgent challenges. The Second World War still raged. In Europe, Allied armies were pushing toward Berlin. In the Pacific, the Japanese military showed no sign of surrender. The fate of millions hung in the balance. Against this backdrop, Truman moved quickly to build bridges with Roosevelt's key advisors, Secretary of State Edward Stettinius, Secretary of War Henry Stimson, and Army Chief of Staff General George Marshall. He needed their knowledge and guidance. Truman's open, forthright style won respect, but he was keenly aware of his knowledge gaps. Deliberately humble, he asked questions continually, determined not to let pride stand in the way of crucial understanding. Within days, Truman learned of the Manhattan Project, the ultra-secret program to construct an atomic bomb. Information Roosevelt had not shared with him. The magnitude was staggering. A weapon of unprecedented destructive potential was nearly complete. This knowledge became the silent burden of his early presidency. Truman's ascension was not only a test of leadership, but of emotional resilience. The public, too, faced uncertainty. Roosevelt was an institution. Truman, by comparison, was little known. Nationally, critics questioned his ability to command. His humility, his frequent confessions of inadequacy, became an unlikely source of strength, disarming skeptics and endearing him to those who prized authenticity over arrogance. International challenges loomed as well. The nascent alliance with the Soviet Union was fracturing. Churchill, Stalin, and Roosevelt had been the wartime triumvirate, but Roosevelt's passing left a vacuum. Truman would have to navigate meetings with leaders who were seasoned in both diplomacy and intrigue. Despite the relentless pressures, Truman's character, shaped by a lifetime of striving, humility, and steadfast morality, became an anchor. He relied on the wise counsel of those around him and on the steadfast support of his wife Bess, whose private strength belied a quiet but formidable influence. As he acclimated to the office, Truman maintained his famous motto, "The buck stops here." Every decision, regardless of its difficulty, would be his to bear. The accumulation of grief, his discomfort with the trappings of power, and the suffering of families across the globe weighed on him. Empathy, sometimes seen as a liability in politics, became Truman's unique strength. It tethered him to the human consequences behind each presidential order. As the weeks passed, the pressing questions intensified. Allied leaders convened at Potsdam, and the framework for a post-war world was being hastily assembled. Meanwhile, word reached Truman that the atomic bomb was nearly ready. He understood that with this new force, the balance of power, the calculus of war, and even the trajectory of humanity itself would forever change. Truman's journey from obscurity to leadership was a crucible forged in adversity and empathy. He had neither sought the presidency nor prepared for its gravest challenges, yet with humility and moral conviction, he would face decisions that would ripple through history. The weight of Roosevelt's shoes was immense, the weight of the world even greater. And in the pressure of those early days, Truman began to reveal the depth of character that would sustain both himself and a troubled nation through its darkest hour. Chapter 4. The Burden of Decision. The Birth of the Atomic Age. In the summer of 1945, Harry Truman confronted a choice that would define not only his presidency, but the course of modern history. The Manhattan Project had culminated in a weapon of unprecedented destruction, a tool capable of unleashing the power of the sun itself. The atomic bomb, as it was now called, was ready, and with it came a burden few could imagine. Truman's introduction to the atomic bomb was jarring. Within days of assuming the presidency, Secretary of War Henry Stimson had quietly ushered him into an antechamber at the White House to reveal the existence of the Manhattan Project. The technical details were staggering, but it was the ethical implications that set Truman apart. To wield such power was to stand on the threshold of a new epoch and a precipice of judgment. The war in Europe had ended on May 8, 1945, but the Pacific Theater raged on. The Japanese military, though battered and isolated, showed little inclination to surrender unconditionally. Allied plans for Operation Downfall, the massive invasion of the Japanese home islands, projected horrifying casualties. Truman's advisors estimated millions of Japanese and Allied lives could be lost in a protracted land assault. The atomic bomb, they argued, offered the possibility of ending the war swiftly. Yet for Truman, the deliberation was tormented. He sought perspectives from military advisors, civilian scientists, and ethical leaders. General Dwight D. Eisenhower urged caution, harboring deep reservations about both the moral and strategic implications. Others, like General Leslie Groves and Secretary of State James Burns, emphasized expedience, ending the conflict quickly and demonstrating American resolve to Soviet leaders. Amid these deliberations, Truman traveled to Potsdam to meet with Churchill and Stalin. There, beneath the veneer of diplomatic routine, the world's future hung in balance. Stalin, aware of the bomb's existence through Soviet espionage, maintained a sphinx-like calm, while Churchill and Truman exchanged warnings about the convulsions to come. The politics of post-war Europe, the division of Germany, and the fate of Eastern Europe were all at stake, adding to the pressures Truman faced. Returning from Potsdam, Truman was informed of the successful test, codenamed Trinity, conducted in the desert of New Mexico on July 16, 1945. The explosion was a terrifying revelation, brighter and more violent than anyone had envisioned. Eyewitnesses reported a brilliance brighter than 1,000 suns, and scientists understood this was not merely a weapon, but a force that could end civilizations. Truman's final decision, whether or not to use the bomb, emerged from days spent pacing the quiet halls of the White House, agonizing over the fate of millions. His deep empathy made the choice an excruciating one. He weighed the suffering of Japanese civilians against the projected losses of American soldiers. He consulted his conscience, revisiting the religious and moral frameworks that had guided him from rural Missouri to the nation's highest office. On July 25, 1945, Truman authorized the use of the atomic bomb. His directive was unambiguous, but his heart was heavy. "This is the most terrible thing ever discovered," he confided, haunted by the destruction that would follow. The president insisted the target be a military one, avoiding schools, hospitals, or other centers of civilian life whenever possible. Yet the reality of urban warfare meant all such distinctions blurred in the chaos of conflict. On August 6, 1945, a lone B-29 bomber, Enola Gay, dropped the bomb over Hiroshima. 3 days later, Nagasaki was struck. The results were catastrophic. In an instant, tens of thousands of lives were erased, entire cityscapes obliterated. The horror unleashed transcended even the most dire predictions. Truman addressed the nation with a grave mixture of pride and sorrow. "We have used it in order to shorten the agony of war," he said, mindful of both the lives saved and the innocent lives lost. As the photographs and survivor accounts reached the White House, Truman was deeply shaken. He refused to authorize a third strike, resisting calls from some advisors for further use. The birth of the atomic age was thus both a triumph and a tragedy, an event that would forever haunt Truman and the world. In the crucible of war, Truman's decision was less an act of bravado than of reluctant necessity, a moral burden shouldered with empathy and grave reflection. It would become the defining legacy of his presidency, a question for generations. Did he do right? Was there another way? The man behind the moment remained deeply troubled by the cost, but resolute that, given the choices before him, he had sought always to serve humanity, to spare pain where he could, and to bear with humility a decision too heavy for any one man. Chapter 5. The Human Cost. Hiroshima, Nagasaki, and Aftermath. The relentless summer heat of August 1945 bore witness to a moment that would forever divide human history into before and after. On the morning of August 6th, the skies above Hiroshima were clear as the B-29 bomber Enola Gay flew overhead, its cargo sealed in secrecy and dread. At 8:15 a.m., the uranium bomb Little Boy detonated with a blinding flash, instantly transforming the city and the world. President Truman, informed at Potsdam, awaited confirmation that the experiment had succeeded. His words to the American people, matter of fact yet momentous, barely concealed the enormity of what had transpired. "We have just dropped a new bomb. It is a harnessing of the basic power of the universe." But even as the nation cheered an imminent peace, its leader privately grappled with the human toll. In Hiroshima, a city of over 300,000, the blast killed tens of thousands outright. Survivors staggered through infernos of shattered glass and burning flesh. Rivers choked with the dying. The living envied the dead. 3 days later, Nagasaki's turn came, a city with its factories and children suffering under the plutonium. A bomb, Fat Man. The world, so recently divided by national rivalries, now recoiled in collective horror and awe. For Truman, these hours ranked among the most lonesome of his life. Diaries reveal his troubled prayers, scribbled concerns over making monsters. He insisted to his aides and family that he had no qualms if it would end the war. But in the quiet moments, the train rides, evenings in the White House, he wondered about the faces of the fallen. He wrote, "I realized what tragedy the bomb involved. I have to decide Japanese will face a rain of ruin from the air, the like of which has never been seen on this earth." Truman's cabinet and military advisors presented the bomb's use as a grim necessity, a way to hasten Japan's surrender and spare American lives. But voices of dissent, such as Secretary of War Henry Stimson and members of the scientific community, urged caution and warning. Could Japan be compelled otherwise? Was such devastation justified even to save more lives? Truman's decision, ultimately, lay nakedly upon his conscience. The aftermath was not only measured in casualties, but in waves, radioactive sickness, lingering for decades, survivors disfigured and traumatized, generations haunted. Truman, receiving reports of the devastation, mourned the necessity that progress had wrought. Internationally, the world's leaders now faced a future where humankind held the power, not simply to wage war, but to erase civilizations. On September 2, 1945, Japan surrendered, and the world's most destructive conflict finally ceased. Yet after Hiroshima and Nagasaki, peace became an anxious, embattled thing. The questions Truman faced about the price of security, the limits of human ingenuity, and the worth of a single life would forever define his legacy and resonate with all who confronted the specter of the atomic age. Chapter 6: Shaping the Modern World, Truman Doctrine and Global Leadership. With the dust of war still unsettling, President Truman turned his attention to a new battlefield, the ideological struggle for the soul of the post-war world. The crumbled cities of Europe and Asia served as reminders of the old world's collapse and the vulnerability of democracy in a landscape ripe for tyranny's advance. Truman recognized that America's newfound atomic might carried with it not only military power, but profound responsibility. He believed that the nation's moral character would be measured not just by victory, but by its stewardship of peace. As the Soviet Union expanded its reach across Eastern Europe, the threat of a new kind of war, cold, psychological, and global, loomed. The turning point came with events in Greece and Turkey in 1947. Both nations teetered on the brink of communist insurgency, their fragile governments unable to withstand external pressure and internal instability. In his famous address to Congress on March 12, 1947, Truman announced what would become known as the Truman Doctrine. It must be the policy of the United States to support free peoples who are resisting attempted subjugation by armed minorities or by outside pressures. This doctrine signaled a seismic change, not merely in American foreign policy, but in the architecture of international relations. No longer would the U.S. retreat into isolationism. It would now actively oppose the spread of authoritarianism wherever it threatened. Truman's leadership was defined not by the pursuit of empire, but by a dogged defense of what he understood as self-determination and freedom. The Marshall Plan soon followed, offering billions in economic aid to a battered Europe. Truman hoped that prosperity would breed stability, and stability lasting peace. Despite the enormity of these actions, the president constantly wrestled with uncertainties. In the council rooms of Berlin, Cairo, and Washington, Truman navigated the unpredictable dynamics of alliance, balancing the aspirations of Churchill's Britain, the suspicion of Stalin's Soviet Union, and the yearning of smaller nations for renewal. The Cold War's first years were marked by crises both simmering and explosive. The Berlin blockade, the founding of NATO, the communist victory in China, and the Korean War's onset. In each, Truman's policies reflected both pragmatism and a profound sense of obligation. Harsh criticism greeted him at home, from those who thought him a warmonger and those who accused him of appeasement. Yet Truman endured, ever aware that each decision shaped the modern world's fragile equilibrium. His methods were not flawless. His vision was sometimes clouded by necessity or incomplete information. Yet in those twilight days of his presidency, Truman looked back upon a transformed globe, perhaps with the somber satisfaction that if nothing else, he had steered the ship through perilous waters, believing deeply in a world where dignity and freedom might yet take root beside the ruins of war. Chapter 7: Personal Struggles Behind the Policy. Although Harry Truman projected confidence before the press and Congress alike, within the sanctuary of his family and the privacy of his journals, a different Truman emerges, one defined by self-doubt, loneliness, and the strain of shouldering the free world's immense burdens. The sudden death of Franklin Roosevelt left Truman not only with a nation to guide, but with the daunting task of stepping into the shoes of a giant. He had never been briefed on the Manhattan Project, and from his very first months in office, he was inundated with crises. The loneliness of command often pressed cruelly upon him. As he confessed years later, "The buck stops here" was both a promise and a personal torment. Truman's relationship with his advisors was at times fraught. Cabinet infighting, intelligence failures, and the ceaseless demands of military leadership led to many sleepless nights. Letters to his beloved wife Bess reveal a man who sometimes wished only for the peace of his Missouri home, longing for the companionship of friends who remembered him as Harry, not Mr. President. Physically, the stresses were enormous. The president suffered from high blood pressure, headaches, and chronic fatigue. He often awoke before dawn, unable to escape the gravity of decisions awaiting him, decisions on which millions depended. The bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki haunted him deeply, with memories of Missouri's gentle fields colliding with the images of human devastation he glimpsed in classified reports and letters from survivors. Public criticism was unforgiving. Newspapers lambasted him as a country bumpkin or the accidental president. Poll numbers plummeted in the wake of labor strikes, racial unrest, and the costly war in Korea. For a man who prided himself on honesty and perseverance, these blows were especially wrenching. Yet it was in these darkest hours that Truman's true resilience shone. He found solace in routine, morning walks, piano music, and reading history. He drew strength from Bess and their daughter Margaret, cherishing tender moments that reminded him who he was beyond the presidency. His vulnerability became, paradoxically, his strength. Truman never pretended to be infallible. Instead, he weighed his conscience carefully, sought counsel earnestly, and learned from each error. He refused to demonize his opponents, instead appealing to the better angels of themselves and of the American people. These personal struggles deeply influenced his policies. Empathy shaped his advocacy for the United Nations, his recognition of Israel, and his fight for civil rights. Feeling the weight of every decision, Truman's empathy became a quiet but unyielding compass, guiding the nation through an age when the stakes had never been higher. Chapter 8. Legacy of a Reluctant Architect. As the years passed and Truman retreated to Independence, Missouri, the weighty mantle of the presidency at last slipped from his shoulders. The world he left behind had been indelibly transformed by his leadership, often in ways that even decades later, historians and citizens alike still argue over. For many, Truman's legacy remains an uneasy paradox. He was, in some eyes, the architect of the atomic world, a man responsible for unleashing powers so great that humanity would forever teeter on the edge between annihilation and enlightenment. Others see in him a reluctant savior, a president who acted not out of ambition, but out of the urgent needs of his time. The controversy over Hiroshima and Nagasaki still divides scholars and citizens. Yet, Truman's own words and actions reveal a man haunted by the responsibility he bore, who strove to ensure that such terrible power would serve the cause of peace, never domination. His foundation of the United Nations and support for nuclear arms control reflected a profound desire to fashion a safer, more stable world. The Truman Doctrine and the Marshall Plan, visionary acts of post-war reconstruction, laid the groundwork. For a half-century of Western prosperity and peace, the NATO alliance he helped to build would outlast the Soviet Union itself, a monument to Truman's belief in collective security. At home, Truman's advocacy for civil rights set a new course for America's moral advancement, even as it cost him political support. His decision to integrate the armed forces paved the way for the victories of the civil rights movement, the echoes of which still resonate. Perhaps Truman's most enduring legacy, however, is found not in policy, but in character. He presided over an era of singular peril and hope, refusing to abandon his sense of humility and humanity. He often said, "I never gave anybody hell. I just told the truth, and they thought it was hell." Upon leaving office, Truman returned to the simple rhythms of Missouri life, at peace with his decisions, while mindful of their consequences. Visitors found him generous, frank, occasionally sharp-witted, and always fiercely loyal to the ideals that had driven him. He remained, until the end, a man of conviction, one who neither sought greatness nor shrank from it when history demanded. In the final measure, Harry Truman's legacy is that of a reluctant architect, one who accepted the burdens of power with steady hands, empathetic heart, and enduring faith that history and time would understand. If you found this video helpful, inspiring, or entertaining, don't forget to hit that like button. And if you're new here, make sure to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss out on future content. Your support means the world. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below.